In 1977, on the plains of Wyoming, a young woman poses for a long-haired man named Rodney Alcala, sharing her personal experiences in the story of a boyfriend who left her. Recalling the love she once had, with whom she traveled across the U.S., the woman grows sad. Her mother had warned her that building a family with him wouldn't work, and indeed, he abandoned her when she brought up children. Rodney tells her to forget about the failed fiancé, saying she's beautiful and will definitely succeed as a model. He promises to help her with that. Suddenly, he puts down the camera and looks at her in a strange way that frightens her, and rightly so. Rodney grabs her by the throat and strangles her. When the woman stops showing signs of life, he gives her artificial respiration. She comes to, only to die a second time. In 1978, Sheryl Bradshaw, an aspiring actress, arrives in Los Angeles, dreaming of stardom. She attends numerous auditions, having memorized serious monologues from well-known plays, but producers want none of that. After yet another rejection, Sheryl drives home, angry at the casting agents who didn't give her the attention she deserved, failing to recognize her determination. At her building, she meets her neighbor Terry, also an actor. He helped her prepare for the audition and can't understand why she didn't make an impression. She had performed the scenes perfectly. Just then, Sheryl gets a call from her agent Helen, who informs her that although she looked good, the producers chose another actress. Sheryl complains about lacking money for rent, and Helen mentions she's arranged for her to be a guest on the TV show, The Dating Game. That evening, Sheryl and Terry watch an episode of the program to understand what she'll need to do, then head out to a bar where she confides in her only friend. Since arriving in Los Angeles, she's been working on herself, rehearsing day and night, but no one seems to notice. And now Helen says a silly TV show might be her shot at getting noticed for a serious project. Terry reassures her, as many stars started with such shows. Still, Sheryl finds participation degrading. Hearing this, Terry jokes that she'll get to meet potential suitors and laugh at them with him later. Unexpectedly, he strokes her neck, but Sheryl pulls away, not expecting this kind of attention from him. He withdraws, thinking she wants to leave, but Sheryl stays. In the morning, they wake up in the same bed. In 1979, in San Gabriel, a young homeless girl named Amy wakes up on the street living off petty thefts. Today is Valentine's Day, and she grabs free candy at the entrance of a laundromat and eats it. Then she notices one of the coin machines is broken, opens it, and steals some change, fleeing from the guard. Later, Rodney spots her sitting under the stairs of a motel and asks if he can photograph her. He tells her she's beautiful and promises to make her a famous model once his pictures win a prestigious competition. Amy poses for him, smiling at his jokes. Back in Los Angeles, Sheryl arrives at the studio for the show. An assistant meets her and leads her to the set, chatting about how today's bachelors aren't half bad, but the makeup artist and hairdresser laugh at the men, calling them hopeless idiots with no intelligence. The host drops by to introduce himself, asking Sheryl not to show too much intellect. She might scare the guys. They dress her in a more daring outfit and lead her to the set. The show begins. The host takes the stage, introduces Sheryl, and invites her on air. In 1971 in New York, Charlie, a flight attendant, moves into a new apartment. She's renovating herself and accidentally spills building materials, forcing her to shower when the doorbell rings. She rushes to open the door for the movers delivering her belongings. She's shocked to learn they won't bring the furniture in due to her delay, which threw them off schedule. Just then, she spots Rodney photographing something across the street and asks him to help carry her furniture inside. He agrees. Afterwards, she offers him a drink and he tells her about famous directors he supposedly worked with in Hollywood. Charlie playfully pretends she hasn't seen these films and doesn't recognize the names. He realizes he's being teased and suddenly turns serious, confessing he's glad to meet such a smart and beautiful woman. Charlie is uncomfortable with the change in tone and mentions she has a lot of work and long-haul flights coming up. Rodney asks if he can photograph her, then attacks her and kills her. Back in the Los Angeles studio, Sheryl appears before the audience. After introductions, the host invites her to start the game. Behind a divider are 3 bachelors. She can ask them anything except their name, age, and occupation. Then she can choose one to go on a date with. The 3rd bachelor is Rodney. One audience member, Laura, tenses up when his face appears on the screen. Meanwhile, Sheryl begins asking questions prepared by the show's organizers. Bachelor 1 stumbles, unable to articulate his answers, and Sheryl pokes fun at him. The second jokes quite crudely, which neither Sheryl nor the audience enjoys. Bachelor 3 is witty, and his responses draw laughter from the audience. But Laura grows increasingly convinced that this man is the one she saw with her friend, who was later found murdered on a beach. She becomes uneasy and leaves the hall, accidentally knocking over a monitor. The show is interrupted as the crew tidies up. The hall is in turmoil as Laura exits the building, gets in her car, and recalls that night on the beach. In 1977, Rodney brings his recent photographs to the Los Angeles Times editorial office, impressing the editors. He notices a young courier and invites him to the beach to take his photo. The boy is surprised and pleased by the attention, but then Rodney is told the police want to see him. He claims it's probably due to a recent robbery. Sometime later, editorial staff see him laughing at an officer's joke and the police leave, but in the restroom, Rodney lets his fear show. Then he spots the courier, who nervously says he won't be able to meet him at the beach, realizing the boy witnessed his outburst of anger. Back with Laura, she remembers coming to her friend's house but being unable to open the door. She called out to her, unaware the woman lay dead on the bed. Sheryl is having her makeup retouched, and an older makeup artist advises her to be herself. After all, what can the organizers do to a temp? Meanwhile, the bachelors discuss Sheryl. The second is fine with a one-time no-strings-attached date, but Rodney confidently declares that she will be his. Laura's boyfriend, worried about her, comes to her car where she shares her suspicions about the third bachelor. That night on the beach, she felt something was off about him. She even described him to the police. She's sure he killed her friend, but her boyfriend doesn't take her seriously, saying producers must screen contestants, and if Bachelor 3 were a killer, he'd be in jail. Laura kicks him out of the car. Meanwhile, the show resumes. Sheryl decides to deviate from the script, finding the questions sexist and offensive. She asks more serious questions, mentioning Einstein and Kant, and asks about the difference between a boy and a man. Bachelors 1 and 2 stumble, clueless about what she's talking about, but Rodney manages to make a good impression. The host, realizing she's off script, is angry but plays along. Rodney answers questions his clumsy competitors can't. Sheryl shines with wit and erudition, mocking the dim-witted Bachelor 1 to the audience's delight. Bachelor 2 responds a bit better, and it's Rodney's turn. Meanwhile, Laura approaches the show's security guard, asking him to help her contact a producer, because she suspects one of the bachelors is a criminal. On stage, Sheryl asks Rodney another tough question, and when he answers, a break is called for the decision. The guard brings Laura to a room where a producer is supposed to meet her. The furious host leaves the stage, demanding that Sheryl be removed from the program after the show. Backstage, Bachelor 2 confronts Rodney with his grievances, and Rodney asks for his address so they can settle the matter after the show. The other gives him his card. In response, Rodney hands him a photo of a murdered girl, pretending it's fake. Meanwhile, Laura waits in vain for the show's management, encountering only a janitor. On stage, the finale plays out. In the end, Rodney wins the date. Bachelor 2 manages to warn Sheryl about Rodney, but she doesn't take it seriously, as they're about to go on an all-expenses-paid trip together. Meanwhile, the janitor admits to Laura that the guard often jokes this way, sending pesky women his way. Upset, she leaves. Sheryl exits the studio and hears Rodney calling her from the parking lot. He invites her for a drink to celebrate the night's success. The scene shifts to an evening when Rodney drives Amy out of town. She marvels at the beautiful scenery, then grabs his photo albums from the back seat and admires the work he's proud of. Rodney asks her to tell him about herself, and she confesses she ran away from home, where her mother drank constantly. She guesses that Rodney's father also abandoned him as a child, and he admits he'd kill him if he ever met him. Amy offers him a chocolate bar, and he slips it into his pocket. Soon they reach a closed-off road and continue on foot. Finally, Rodney finds the spot he wanted and begins photographing her, admiring her beauty and grace. Then he attacks her. In Los Angeles, Sheryl and Rodney arrive at a bar. He tries to win her over, discussing the play she mentions. He's pleased to hear she has an audition for an upcoming play and compliments her as an actress. Later, he brings up the topic of the soul, and she admits she doesn't go on dates. She joined the show just for publicity, but talking to Rodney makes her nervous when he orders more drinks. She's relieved when the bar closes. They walk outside, and Rodney insists on escorting her to the parking lot where her car is parked and asks for her phone number. She writes it down for him, but as they reach the lot, he insists she double-check it, and she realizes she gave him a fake number and can't remember the real one. She tells him she won't be going on the trip with him and turns to her car. Rodney mutters a threat as she nervously hurries to get in, almost becoming his next victim. At that moment, a group of people emerges from the studio, scaring him off. Rodney leaves, and Sheryl gets in her car and drives away. The next day, Laura's boyfriend arrives with flowers, asking for her forgiveness for not believing her. He takes her to the police, where she gives a statement, but the officer isn't interested in reopening the case, and Laura, frustrated, storms out. Sheryl packs her things, says goodbye to Helen, and announces that she's leaving the industry and moving away from Hollywood. In 1979, in San Gabriel, a bound, wounded, and partially unclothed Amy regains consciousness in the desert next to a crying Rodney. She feigns shame over the incident, asking him to keep it secret. This earns his trust, and she convinces him to untie her, suggesting they go back to his place and be a couple. Amy and Rodney return to the car, where he apologizes for his behavior. She reassures him, pretending she's not upset. They drive toward the city. At a gas station, Rodney goes to the restroom and Amy runs away. Rodney searches briefly, but then sees the police arrive and arrest him. Amy, hiding in a cafe, watches tearfully. In the postscript, it's revealed that after Rodney's arrest, he was released on bail pending trial, during which he killed a 21-year-old woman and a 12-year-old girl. Rodney was rearrested in 1979. It was only then that the scale of his crimes came to light. For years, few surviving witnesses had reported him, but authorities hadn't taken action. He was ultimately convicted for the murder of 7 women and girls, although some believe he had up to 130 victims. After 31 years in prison, Rodney had one last chance at exoneration, but the woman who had once escaped him appeared in court and testified against him. Sheryl Bradshaw left California and dedicated her life to her family. Rodney Alcala died in prison. Watching the film is challenging due to the constant flashbacks. The story jumps back and forth, and those who don't remember the dates will find it hard to follow. The killer's portrayal isn't particularly frightening, but if the word maniac were stamped on his forehead, the police's job would be the easiest in the world, wouldn't it?